Today, the death of Pope Francis. I'm Tony DeCopel in New York. We are reflecting on the life and the legacy after the Vatican announced just 2 hours ago that Pope Francis died this morning. Francis had appeared in public less than 24 hours earlier, blessing a thrilled Easter Sunday crowd in St. Peter's Square. 88 years old, the Pope was, of course, recovering from a case of double pneumonia that put him in the hospital for more than a month. In a moment, we're going to talk to Chris Livesay, who is live in Rome. But first, Nora O'Donnell, who we're lucky to have here. She interviewed Francis at the Vatican almost exactly a year ago. Nora, good morning. Your reactions.
Yeah, good morning to you, Tony. That's right. You know, he was called the People's Pope, and remarkable to wake up this morning and realize he has passed on this Easter Monday. You know, Pope Francis led the Roman Catholic Church for more than 12 years. Throughout that time, I guess you could consider his papacy as someone who reached out to groups that have been overlooked, marginalized throughout the church history. And this was just one way his papacy set a strikingly different tone.
The Holy Father set the tone with his first official act as Pope, reversing a centuries-old tradition. I want to ask you a favor, he said. Before the bishop blesses the people, I ask that you would pray to the Lord to bless me. He named himself after Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his simplicity and humility. The first pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope said he wanted a poorer church, one that would include the excluded. Rather than living in the lavish papal apartments where popes have lived for hundreds of years, he set an example by choosing to live at the Santa Marta, a simple guest house on Vatican grounds.
What an honor.
That's where we met him in April 2024. His desire to reach out to ordinary people sent the bulletproof Pope-mobiles into storage. I cannot greet people from inside a sardine can, Francis famously explained, even if it is made of glass. He'd become one of the most popular public figures in the world, regularly speaking up for the voiceless, especially migrants and refugees. During his papacy, he was faced with a wave of clerical sex abuse scandals that stretched to the very highest levels of the church. He was accused at first of being tone deaf in his slow response to the crisis. But then, in 2019, the Pope made sweeping changes to allow for greater accountability and transparency and abolished the top-level confidentiality of pontifical secret.
You have said zero tolerance.
It cannot be tolerated. When there is a case of a religious man or woman who abuses, the full force of the law falls upon them. In this, there has been a great deal of progress.
A few weeks after we interviewed Francis, it was reported that he used a homophobic slur in 2 private meetings. But in his more than a decade as Pope, he voiced support for bringing the LGBTQ community into the church. That push started aboard a papal flight just months into his tenure. Who am I to judge, he said. Hailing from South America, Pope Francis's simple style was a product of his humble beginnings. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in 1936 in Buenos Aires to an immigrant Italian railway worker and a housewife. As a young man, he lost part of a lung to an infection. He was ordained at the late age of 32. Francis claimed he only brought a small bag to the conclave that elected him because he expected to be going back home to Argentina.
Do you like when you are called the People's Pope?
El Papa de la gente.
Instead, he became one of the oldest popes in history, having traveled to more than 60 countries and keeping a busy schedule until the final days of his life.
What do you hope your legacy is?
I never really thought about it. The church is the legacy. The church not only through the Pope, but through you, through every Christian, through everyone. Personally, I get on the bandwagon of the church and its legacy for all.
You mean that the church is for everybody?
Yes, for everybody.
And as you can see there, Tony, in our conversation, which was more than about an hour long, his warmth, his conviction, the historic nature of his papacy, as we explained, because not only was he the first Jesuit Pope, the first Pope from the Americas, the first to choose the name Francis, as I pointed out there, because he wanted to bring a focus to the poor. And that's why he lived so simply in Casa Santa Marta, which is where we did that interview. Now, as what his legacy will be, we asked him about that in our interview, and he said he hadn't thought much about it. He hopes the legacy is the church, in his words. But I think in many of the papal scholars that we have spoken to recently and just over a year ago, they noted that he had changed the tune, but not the lyrics of the church. Do you understand what I mean? In other words, a lot of church doctrine did not change, but he did try to make the Catholic Church more inclusive, whether it was his message about gays or same-sex unions to, while he is not allowing women to become priests or deacons, he did appoint 2 women to high offices within the Vatican, managerial offices. That is a step forward. And then just one other thing that I thought was really noteworthy, too, that I learned, Tony, spending time with him, is now in St. Peter's Square, where we saw tens of thousands of people yesterday gather to celebrate Easter. There are now showers for the homeless. They can also receive medical care there. And that was part of Francis's outreach, to make sure that the Catholic Church and the world focuses on the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, Nora, it's so great to have you here. 1 year ago, you were in conversation with the Pope, the first extensive, wide-ranging interview that the Pope had with an American broadcast journalist, you being that journalist. One of my favorite anecdotes that I've come across this morning, something that's going around, is a story of the Pope as he tells his mother back in the 1960s that he wants to go into the priesthood, and she says, please, I would suggest you study medicine instead. And he tells her, as the story goes, I'm studying the medicine of the soul. And then in his role as Pope, medicine, it would seem, for the church as well, those changes to refocus the church on different parts of the Catholic experience. Sometimes it was something that cheered liberals and distressed more conservative members of the church. But as you point out, there was a change in the tune, but not in the doctrine. And I think that continues, as I understand it, in the plans now for the Pope's funeral. He won't be buried at St. Peter's. What do we know about his plans and what's next?
That's right. I mean, a couple of things. That's right. I mean, he studied to be a chemist and then, of course, was a Jesuit. And that's different. And as we talk about how the church may or may not have changed, we should note that as the conclave will commence in some 15 to 20 days from now to choose a new pope, Pope Francis put in place 110 cardinals of the 138 or so that will vote for the next pope. So that is a big influence he has had on the church, even though he has not changed essentially much of the doctrine. So I think that's worth noting as well. And then what was your other question, Tony, about Pope Francis?
What do we know? He's not going to be buried in St. Peter's. We know there were changes to the way he was announced as Pope. I love the way your obituary began with the fact that he was blessed by the people before he then blessed the people in turn. It's such a beautiful way to announce himself to the world. So, yes, go on.
On that note, what we do know, which is really interesting, he is going to be buried at the Church of St. Mary Major, not inside the Vatican, which is highly unusual. This is the church where he will be buried is the largest Marian church in all of Rome. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. It is actually the church where Pope Francis goes to pray before and after every single international trip that he does. So he has been there more than 100 times. And the reason, it's a really beautiful church. And the reason that he goes there, once again, is to bring the focus to Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mother. This is a picture of him there praying right before this really beautiful picture of the Virgin Mary. And so he will be buried there. And again, I think it's just, like you said, how the Pope has tried to do things differently, to break with the centuries-old tradition of the Roman Catholic Church and to bring a attention, whether it is to the marginalized and the poor, or in this case where he will be buried, to Mary. A saint that he, of course, and the Blessed Virgin Mother, and to bring attention to her teachings and what she represents for the Catholic Church.
No, it's an amazing thing, as you pointed out, a pope of firsts in his life and now a pope of firsts in his death as well. We have Chris Livesay in Vatican City for us. Chris, where are you? What's the mood there? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Good morning, Tony. Well, I am overlooking St. Peter's Square just behind me, and you'll hear gongs of the bell. Each one of those gongs represents 1 year of Pope Francis's life. He died, of course, at the age of 88, so we will hear 88 gongs throughout this morning. Apart from those gongs, they really pierce a deafening silence that has laid over St. Peter's Square ever since the news broke this morning, just before 10 a.m. local time, that Pope Francis had died. And that silence really stood out in stark contrast to the scenes we witnessed yesterday here in St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis taking a victory lap of sorts through St. Peter's Square in the Pope Mobile for the very first time since he was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks ago. You can hear him struggling to say, "Happy Easter, brothers and sisters." All of this, we should mention, in defiance of doctor's orders. Now, he was told to stay home and rest and avoid mingling with the public for at least 2 months, but those doctor's orders proved to be too much for the Pope during Holy Week, the holiest week of the year, and of course on Easter Sunday, which really capped off a string of surprise appearances that Pope Francis made. On one example, he just sort of popped up in St. Peter's Basilica behind me, wasn't wearing his zucchetto, that's the head covering of the Pope. He was wearing black pants, so not the papal white, and he had a poncho covering his shoulders as he was wheeled around beside a tomb. So he didn't even look like a pope. It really struck people just how normal and down to earth he appeared. Then about a week ago on Palm Sunday, he made another surprise appearance, mingling with about 20,000 people here in St. Peter's Square. On Thursday, Holy Thursday, he made a surprise appearance at a prison where he kissed hands of many of the prisoners and they kissed his. About 70 inmates there. Again, all of this unscripted, unplanned, and it turned out to be just a drum roll, a sort of dress rehearsal for that comeback appearance, as it were, on Easter, which also turned out to be his last appearance, Tony.
Chris Livesay for us. Chris, thank you very much. Nora O'Donnell reporting as well with an obituary there, remarking the passing and reflecting on the life of Pope Francis, age 88, 12 years as Pope, at times to cheers from more liberal members of the church and much distress for conservative members of the church. But as Nora points out, while he changed the tune of the church, he did not change the doctrine. And now we look to what happens next. For much more coverage, you should stay on this channel, 7 a.m. A special edition of CBS Mornings will follow. You may remember the Pope was in the hospital for more than a month with double pneumonia. So while this is, of course, a shock, it is also at the same time not a shock. We will cover it extensively in the hours ahead. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Tony DeCopel in New York.
St. Hope, life-changing healthcare.
For 50 years, American Furniture Warehouse has proudly helped families turn houses into homes. Whether you're designing your dream living room, updating your home office,